and welcome to this Qmed podcast on structured dialogue. And today I'm honored to be joined by TÜV SÜD, and with me from TÜV SÜD I have who? Ralph and Ulrich. Could you give a short introduction?
Sure. So, hello, my name is Ralf Gansel. I'm the department manager from Special Operations and Support, and responsible for every new client request of any kind in every kind of service. That means MDR, IVDR, non-active and active devices and implantables and special projects.
Okay. That sounds comprehensive. And you?
My side, my name is Ulrich Nietzsche. I'm an internal clinician at TÜV SÜD, so one of the persons who is responsible for assessing the clinical evaluation of the high-risk devices. I'm the global director of our clinical department, so we have about 40 internal clinicians, which I'm overseeing, and by training, I'm a board-certified abdominal surgeon.
Okay, interesting. Yes. And I think just to jump into what is a structured dialogue, I know, Ralph, you have a very nice presentation that I know you can talk over and give a bit of sense to what a structured dialogue is.
Yes, sure. Just give me a second. So many times we have shared the word structured dialogue, but it's not really clear to everyone what it is. And I want to give you a little guide from the clinical strategy, starting from the department, from the manufacturers to the final certification decision at the notified bodies. So I wanted to start with this very lovely picture of Nosferatu, because this is the feedback I received from the industry, that the notified body are seen as this very bloodthirsty vampire who wants to kill the industry and the access to the market. And this picture is absolutely not true. And I wanted to focus more on a different picture, this very cute puppy and this fluffy unicorn, which is maybe also a little bit too much, but I think this the approach of this image is that the notified body wants to be the point of contact you are not afraid of to contact. So we are your friendly partner and we guide you through the whole process at the very beginning, and that's the important part during a development phase from the manufacturers. But let's jump into details. Structured dialogue, where does it come from? This is not an invention from the notified bodies or from TÜV SÜD. So this is written in the MDCG 2022-14. And here we have clearly described what this is about. So the manufacturers are allowed to contact on a very early stage the notified bodies without signing any contract, or does it is kind of illegal. Everyone knows that notified bodies try to say, okay, this is kind of consulting, we cannot do this. So at this point, it is acceptable to raise questions and we are allowed to respond to them according to our possibilities. In this structured dialogue, you can have a dialogue which is structured and iterative, and the manufacturers can address the gaps and uncertainties, especially for clinical evidence, but it's not limited to it. It's also thinkable that you can ask questions for cybersecurity or biocompatibility, testing cases, whatever you can imagine. So, and everything is possible in a timely manner. So please consider this maybe 1.5 years before you actually start submitting your application. So jump into a little bit more detailed overview from the main areas. So I want to show you that the onboarding process, where you just discuss strategies, this is very generic and most likely for everyone. But you also can discuss sites and suppliers and devices, the device classification and the code assignment, and how this whole process works. On top, we have topics for the manufacturer. So I mentioned already the testing part, but we have a framework agreement. What is this about? How we can prepare for this? And what about transfer services? If you are working already with a notified body, you can combine certificates with your current certification body to your incoming certification body or notified body. So this is something we can discuss. And on top, for the conformity assessment procedure. So every notified body has its same system. We assess the devices, but how is the details, the plannings, when you have to submit your technical documentation, what about the cost, fees, and other aspects? So there are some certain requirements from the MDR, but on the other hand, we can also provide you guidance documents. We have the most recent updates from Brussels. We can share, of course, some information in advance, some checklist, so the manufacturers can prepare for the submission and have a rough overview about the question which will be raised from the notified body. But that sounds very lovely. How does this early engagement really work? So in general, you can be done in 5 to 6 weeks with the whole structured dialogue. So you just raise your hand and say, hey, I would love to talk to TÜV SÜD about this. We have an inquiry website. You can register yourself and you will receive latest after 24 hours an invite for a call to discuss what exactly do you need. We will just tell you something about what is possible and not. And then we are already in the phase where we can set a date where you would love to talk. Latest, this is a recommendation, 1 week prior the meeting itself, you provide an agenda and your questions and an overview about your device so that everyone can prepare for the meeting. On the meeting day itself, this can be performed via Microsoft Teams, which is in most cases, we just make it via Teams, but I also had some structured dialogues which the manufacturer was coming to TÜV SÜD, but we also can come to the client itself. And then we have a meeting around 1 to 4 hours. This is also a decision for the manufacturer. My experience is that 2 hours are enough. Afterwards, we also have to provide meeting minutes to our competent authority. So we will write everything down, what we discussed, so that we are not consulting. We will not consult you during this meeting. So we need to be very transparent on this, but this is also helpful for you that you have something in advance. And to see more about the opportunities. So everyone is telling you about availabilities and there are deadlines which comes from the industry, and we just tell the reality. So we just make a real time frame when we just say, okay, you want to be ready on the 1st of June. We can say, okay, this is the minimum time we need, a buffer, what is realistic from our experience so far. So we will share this. We will jump into transfer services in detail. So just let me highlight 3 points. Like, we can transfer only the certificate one-to-one, and it must be at least valid for 6 months, or withdrawn or cancelled. So I had once the case, a client was so happy we took over, and then he cancelled on the second day after we talked, and then you cannot transfer a cancelled certificate. So please don't do this. And with the info buffet, this is something for the checklist I shared, which is very valuable for the clients to prepare. And they can decide based on their deadline which kind of service they would like to use. So we have expedite service, which is twice as fast, and dedicated is 4 times faster. And the rolling review is for the ones who are not finished with the technical documentation for all modules at the same time. So there are opportunities we can discuss in detail during a structured dialogue. And
so it gives options to the manufacturer on how to not only the input to their documents, but also to their business planning.
Exactly. And now I'm coming to my last slide, and this shows the different phases. So when you are approaching a notified body, you are in a pre-application phase, and this phase is non-binding. So after you sign the application forms and you received a quotation, you are in a binding contract phase, but the structured dialogue is happening in this area. Therefore, the manufacturers have the possibility during a structured dialogue to receive an opinion and the viewpoint from a notified body without making a final decision whether I would love to go with that notified body or not. So, I mean, we all humans and people, we love the interaction. Sometimes you say, okay, they are very unfriendly, I don't like them. I would love to go with someone else. This is the choice of the manufacturer at that point. So it's non-binding. But if we can provide you with information which is helpful, of course, this is the start of a fruitful collaboration and relationship for the future.
Yeah, because it is a long process, right? It's even though some underestimate the time to development, but device development phase is what, 5, 6, 10, even more years. And it's also a long time for the manufacturers to have these questions if they don't get a response to it. That's at least what we see as consultants, is that they have a lot of questions in the beginning. And getting I think like the structured dialogue to getting valid input is super important for them.
Absolutely. And you also have to consider that we are playing the long game. So after the final certification, the surveillance activity starts, and you still need someone, you need a partner you are willing to approach at any time. He likes to respond and help you to develop the devices further. So there are changes coming, and you need someone who is aware of this and share this information with you.
Who are the persons that that can order a structured dialogue? Who is your normal client that order a structured dialogue?
So there is no limitation. Of course, it makes sense only for medical device industry to approach a notified body, but also for the certification body. So if you're only interested in an ISO 13485, so this is also helpful to plan make a strategy. Most likely for startups, they start with an ISO certification, and they have 4, 5, 6 years ahead first the idea of starting with a TD assessment. But this is also a possibility to discuss this and already have a relationship with a potential notified body, even though you start with a certification body at that point.
Yeah. And who can attend from TÜV? Now we have Ulrich here in the meeting, and is that sort of is that a good representation of who would attend, or Does it depend?
Should I answer that? So it completely depends on what the client is requesting. I was attending the last structured dialogue yesterday, for example. That was a startup company. They had a question regarding a device, if this is a medical device at all, and regarding another device, what would be strategies for getting this certified. So there were clearly clinical questions, which I was happy to answer. But on the other hand, regarding the classification questions, for example, we would take our other experts in that calls. And therefore, it's so important that we get somehow an idea of the agenda before, so that we at TÜV can also decide which of our experts need to be included in that discussion.
Yeah. Okay. And is now I know you mentioned 2 hours, Ralph, as that's sort of a good sort of estimation what a structured dialogue takes. But is that the norm, like on how long it's going to take a structured dialogue? Or does that also depend?
Well, in general, that's the experience we gained through the last year since we have this service in place. But there is no limitation. So if the client has the need, he needs to have more contact with the notified body. He can have more structured dialogues on specific topics. So Uli mentioned he had it yesterday as for clinical topics. Before the clinical trial starts, it makes sense. But at some point, you now focus more on biocompatibility and testing what you have to consider. At that point, you can have an expert talk from someone from that area.
Okay. So
oftentimes what we recognize, is that it makes maybe more sense for a client not to have one structured dialogue over a whole day or something, but rather start with initial questions, then see what the feedback is from TÜV SÜD, and then maybe have another structured dialogue. So I remember one company, they aimed to get a new device on the market, and over, I think, 1 or 2 years, we had 3 or 4 structured dialogues. And that helped them a lot, that they were always checking, are we on the right track still? And we could agree, or we could raise our concerns, and then they could go on with the planning.
That sounds like a company that has planned ahead. And when you go into a structured dialogue, you mentioned it also, Ralph, that submit your questions. How about the documents that can you provide it, and is there a limit to it? And I know, of course, the documents, if you provide them, should be relevant to your questions, right? But is there a limit to what you can talk about?
It's a very good question, because we are just talking about a meeting for 1 and 2 hours. And this must be filled and prepared, of course. So agenda and question is most likely and highly appreciated. But if you provide like almost a full technical documentation with thousands of pages, no expert can read everything in advance through it. So you have to limit it to like intent and purpose. You need a clear identification about the device. If you just have the classification, that would be very helpful. If the IFU is in a draft version available, when you just describe the procedure and details, that would be helpful. And for clinical topics, Uli, I think you like having a CEP, so that we understand your strategy, what you consider. But those are the basics. So clear device identification, your plan, your questions, and maybe an overview about the whole system and what you intend to do. That's the limitation to it, to have a very effective and efficient meeting.
And I can say from Qmed side, we also, as I said, well, in especially startups, there are so many things that are within the unknown. So of course they have a lot of questions, but the thing is that one thing is their questions, the other thing is what they don't know, right? So you also, I think, at least as a consultancy, we can bring up some of these things that they don't know. Yeah. Okay.
You can bring up what they don't know, and we can say what we don't like. So.
Yeah, that's true. And it is also more appropriate because in the end, you're also the one that makes the decisions, right?
Yes.
Just one last question. Can a class 1 have a structured dialogue?
Sure.
Sure. Yeah. So
and this, it always seems like class 1 doesn't need any notified body, which is true, but
yeah.
every manufacturer has a responsibility he has to fulfill, even though no
exactly.
notified body is auditing it on an annual base, but he needs to be prepared. And in this is, for some manufacturers, there are some uncertainties, and this is something he can clarify during such a call.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's also what we see. Sometimes they get surprised that they need the same level of documents as a class 3, but that's, you know, how it is. The content is not the same, I know, but the document still needs to be in place. Okay, if it's okay, I would like to switch to sort of the other part of this call. Is there is prepared a CP, and I know Ulrich and Ralph, you have seen it. I've created a dummy CP, so for those listening, please note it's not complete. That is by intention. So please don't copy paste it and think you are home safe. You are not. Ulrich can probably also say that. But within that CP, we have tried to make a fictive device. It is a device that is similar to something that is on the market. It is an AI-powered algorithm in order to detect polyps in colonoscopies. So something that is available out there in several different other types and forms. And for those that are interested, the CP is also available. But I would like to address some questions for the CP. It's probably you, Ulrich, that would you agree about the intended use statement? Is that acceptable for a submission?
Yeah, and that's now exactly a very good point. So as we said before, every document can be handed in for a structured dialogue, and we can discuss about every document, but it will clearly not always be possible to give a very comprehensive answer or a binding answer at all. And so in the case of the question regarding the intended purpose statement, for example, what we could say or discuss during a structured dialogue is that based on the documentation that we see, we don't see any concerns, or we don't see any severe issues here with what you have presented to us. However, it would not be possible to give a statement like, this intended purpose statement is acceptable, please hand it in, and then your TD will be accepted. And that's one reason is, of course, we are not allowed to consult, so and we are not allowed to give really a binding answer on what we would recommend you to do, so that you would receive your application accepted. And on the other hand, of course, from a practical point of view, we would never be possible also if we would like to do this. So like here with this fictive device would be very easy to say, yes, I completely agree on that. But in the end, then no complete review and assessment of the documents would be required anymore, because we will only be able to really give a binding statement once we have reviewed all the data that is available, all the claims which are available, all the technical documentation, all the testing, preclinical tests, and so on. So therefore, this is actually the limitation of a structured dialogue. It's not exactly the same like the assessment, which takes many hours for many experts. We can lay open critical issues that we identify, but it will not be possible just from a practical point of view to give a binding answer and say, yes, this is acceptable, please go ahead.
Yeah, and what we also see sometimes is that the intended use or intended purpose is like you say, it's not coherent with the testing and the clinical studies. So it might be a good intended purpose, but if you don't fulfill it by completing a clinical investigation related to your intended purpose, then it's not really a good intended purpose, right?
Exactly, that's the point. Yeah.
Yeah. And then can TÜV give recommendation to the classification of the device? So in the CP we stated it's a 2A, and would that be a question I can ask?
Yes, absolutely. So questions regarding formal aspects, is this a medical device? What kind of risk class is this medical device? What does this trigger as possible regulatory pathways for the clinical evaluation and something like that? These would be questions which are very appropriate for a structured dialogue. Absolutely.
And if we consider the intended use, and I know also a little about, I've included some claims, would it be appropriate for me to ask if a 50-patient study is enough?
That's actually very good that you...
I know it's a trick question, sorry.
Yeah, it's very good that you mentioned this, because this is exactly a question that we receive very often times. And unfortunately, again, it will not be possible to give a binding answer here. And the reason is actually that this would require to have the clinical investigation protocol, for example, to check what kind of primary endpoints do you have, what are you aiming to get as a level of evidence in the end, and then by this it can be calculated. So also, if you would ask your statistician, is it okay to include 50 patients here? Then he could not say yes or no. He would need to calculate everything, and that's exactly the same issue. So we can, in this case, so for the device which is intended to detect polyps in the colon, we could check for the criticality that we see here, and based on this get a conclusion if we think that this is a very critical device, and therefore we consider that it is very important that you have a very good investigation, for example, ruling out also risks, or also very rare risks, which would imply, of course, that you would need higher patient number, or we could come to the conclusion or agree that based on the risk classification, based on the current state of the art, this area is rather well known, for example, and therefore it may be possible to have rather a limited number of patients, but the final calculation, in this case of the sample size, for example, that's in any case something that has to be done by a statistical calculation, and in the end by the one who is performing the investigation.
Yeah, exactly, and it's also, I think, a process to get there, right? So look into your state of the art, get input of what is reference values, but also the non-clinical testing. What was your validation like? What were, for at least for this type of device in your software build, what was the, what's it called? I have severity and probability, but that's from risk management.
Specificity and sensitivity?
Yes, thank you. Because
and that's actually also a very good point. Sorry, that in the end, when you're calculating the sample size calculation, you don't know the results of the study, of course, and therefore we will never, also if we calculate everything, we could not say, yes, include 50 patients, then you will be able to get this device on the market. Maybe
exactly.
then you see that 49 of these patients were dying, and then we cannot say, yes, we have said we accept it. So in the end, what we are interested in is, have you chosen the right endpoints to confirm the safety and performance and the intended clinical benefit of the device as you intend to bring it on the market later on? So I think these are maybe even the more interesting questions the notified body during a structured dialogue.
Yeah, and as you know, that's also why we did the CP. I know because this is also where you tell the notified body about your claims, right? So there should be a connection between your clinical claims, regardless of safety and performance. But that connection to your endpoints in a clinical study, that should be clearly visible. And I think you actually answered my next question. That was about how to find that. But do a sound rationale, look at your non-clinical testing, your validation, state of the art, go to a biostatistician, work out a plan, and then have a connected to your claims. Can you make changes to a device during a pivotal investigation?
That's also a very interesting question. And here again, I would say, yes, of course you can, but it would usually not be the notified body or TÜV SÜD in that case, which would be the direct contact and the most appropriate contact to discuss this. So if we are talking about a pre-market clinical investigation now, as far as I understand, for this hypothetical device, then if you're performing a clinical investigation, this would be a pre-market clinical investigation. That means you need a statement by the competent authority, which is accepting the study on patients, and also a vote by the ethics committee. And then if you would plan to change something of the design, maybe if we are talking about the software, you are fixing a software bug or something, or you're including a new additional feature in the software or whatever, then what the person who is performing the clinical investigation would have to do is to consider if this is giving an additional safety risk to the patient, or if it's changing something in the calculation of the clinical investigation plan, and then make an amendment of the clinical investigation plan in accordance with the local ethics committee and with the competent authority. And then in the end, the part, and that's of course something that we are very happy to discuss with every manufacturer during these phases. But then in the end, once the study is finished and the results are available, then this is the important result that you as a consultant or the manufacturer will need for handing in the complete documentation and all the clinical data which are available. So therefore, it's actually, to come to that answer, yes, of course, this is possible, but it needs consideration if something is changed during a clinical investigation. But it's not so relevant, maybe in many cases, for the notified body. So, for example, if you are handing in then for the application your study results, and you're notifying us that after half of the patients you made a fix of a software bug or something, then this would not be of very high relevance usually for TÜV SÜD. On the other hand, for example, if you would hand in the results and you let us know that 45 patients were treated with software version 1, and then you recognize that there were very severe bugs and therefore you had to change it, and then the last 5 patients were treated with the new version, then of course you would only have evidence of 5 patients, which may be not sufficient anymore to prove safety and performance of that device, which you are now planning to bring on the market. So these are considerations that would have to be done then.
And the reason why I'm asking is because we get the questions as well. So it's And then another thing is within the CEP, we have tried to make a literature search method. Can I ask, would you agree with the method used?
That's also a good point. And this is exactly something which can be discussed and we're happy to discuss in a structured dialogue. So what we would screen in this case would be, have you included the right name, so the name of the device in the literature search? Have you used different, so multiple databases to search? Have you done as a comprehensible state-of-the-art search also, which you will need to identify the acceptance thresholds for safety and performance for your device? So in this case, what you have presented, we could come to the conclusion, for example, that based on the search string that you have handed in, we don't have concerns with this at the moment from what we see. Of course, that is not a 100% guarantee that what you will find when you perform the search will be what you are looking for in the end. But from a methodological point of view, this is something that we can agree on in that case.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and I know working with clinical evaluations myself a lot, it's also one thing is your plan, right? But it's quite often we add a little statement that we change the search string during the actual search and trying to find the literature because you see small deviations or you like to change a word because the other word that you used initially actually didn't work as well or created 0 hits or something.
Yeah, and which is of course good, and that's exactly the way it should be. You should learn with what you're doing and then be able to amend if required. But the point is just everything should be openly disclosed and written down what happened. So it should be reproducible in the end. And that's something where I have sometimes the impression manufacturers are fearing a little bit that could make a problem if they are disclosing to TÜV SÜD that they had to change something. But in the end, it's exactly the other way around. The more honest everything is disclosed, the easier it will be for us to go through and to accept it in the end.
Yeah. Is vigilance a requirement if the device is not on the market? Because you know, vigilance searches in for example, BfArM or NHS or Mode or the FDA ones. Is that a requirement if the device is not on the market to include that in a CEP?
Of course, then you will not find anything for this device if it's not marketed yet, but it would be required to receive a comprehensive state-of-the-art overview to search for similar devices. So that you would be aware of if, for example, in the case of this AI software for detecting polyps, if there have been 10 other softwares on the market already, but they all had to be withdrawn because all the patients developed colorectal cancer because the AI didn't work, then that would be an important hint which should be included in the clinical evaluation. So therefore, for the state-of-the-art search, yes, vigilance search would be important.
Yeah. Okay. I think that was actually my questions on the CEP, and this was just to give an example of course, you know it more than me, Ulrich, but examples of what you can ask in a structured dialogue if that is what you are missing answers to. And this is a short list. I know there is a lot more and probably also a lot more specific, but of course, for the purpose of this meeting, it's difficult to be specific without going into a specific device. I just want to say thanks to both of you for attending and telling about a structured dialogue. And of course, feel free to reach out to TÜV and take the approach that Ralph mentioned. Besides that, of course, you can also reach out to us to get some input on how to ask questions and what would be a right approach, and what sometimes also what is most important. So these questions about what you don't know. So you could ask questions that might be super relevant for a structured dialogue, but if let's say we go over your documents, we could see that something was a lot more persisting and would be more relevant for a structured dialogue. That is something we can offer. And Ralph, you have the last word.
I have already the QR code presenting, so yeah, please feel free to scan this very fancy TÜV SÜD QR code. Still, my message is keep the fluffy unicorn and the puppy in mind, that you can reach out to the notified bodies at any time, and at a very early stage. We are here to help, and we are very interested in developing together with the manufacturers novel products for the European market, and we love to bring them together on the market.
Yes. And I think that concludes today's session. And again, thank to you both for attending, and see you next time.
All right.
Goodbye. See you.